You can see live coverage of the U.S. House on C-SPAN and live coverage now of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Spirit, your kingdom is above all earthly kingdoms. Empower the members of this body with the wisdom, courage, and strength needed for our times. Infuse them with a passion to act in ways that honor your name. Preserve their health and strength by your mercy and power, and may they find your grace sufficient for every need. Lord, bless also the citizens of this great land. Give them the wisdom to pray for our governmental leaders so that all people may live quiet and peaceful lives in all goodness and holiness. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 10, 2011. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jean Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
President,
The Majority Leader.
I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
Madam President, if only any leader marks the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 5 p.m. today. Majority will control the first 30 minutes. Republicans will control the next 30 minutes. Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 today for our weekly caucus meetings. Working to set up a debate and vote on the nomination of Edward Chen to be a district judge from the state of California. Senators will be notified when that vote is going to be scheduled.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
Madam President, later today, the President is expected to speak in El Paso about our nation's immigration policy. Getting immigration policy right is one of the more difficult challenges we face as a nation, and Republicans are committed to meeting it. As with most serious challenges, however, the only way we'll make progress is by working on a solution that's acceptable to both parties. For Republicans, that means the President will have to present a plan that takes amnesty off the table and focuses instead on making a real commitment to border and internal security. If the President does these two things, he will find strong bipartisan support. If he doesn't, he won't. Another difficult challenge we're only solving by working together is bringing down the nation's debt. To that end, members of both parties met with the Vice President last week at Blair House. The participants had what all sides agreed was a productive meeting, and they'll meet again this afternoon. Unfortunately, there still seems to be a serious disconnect between the two parties on this issue. There are still those on the other side who think we can put off difficult decisions until after the next presidential election or even beyond. Republicans strongly disagree. In our view, doing nothing about the debt would be far more dangerous in the long run than failing to raise the debt ceiling. I've said this before, and Speaker Boehner reiterated the point yesterday in New York. The warning bells are simply too loud to ignore this crisis any longer, and the debt limit debate presents us with a prime opportunity for meaningful, positive action. If the last financial crisis taught us anything, it's that we can't afford to play with fire when it comes to economic forces this great. We need to get serious now, before the crisis that we know is coming. And that means entitlement reform needs to be on the table. This is a serious crisis. We must do something serious. Entitlement reform needs to be a part of it. That's the only way we'll send a message to the world that we are actually willing to make the tough decisions needed to get our fiscal house in order. That's the only way the markets, the American people, and the rest of the world, especially those that hold so much of our debt, will believe we're on the right track. So as we prepare for a second round of talks, I would renew the call to get serious about this looming crisis and do something serious. And I renew my pledge this morning to do what it takes to make sure we avert it without raising taxes or building in automatic tax increases in the future, which would only destroy jobs. We can avert this crisis without doing harm to the economy or slowing down any economic recovery. That means no tax hikes now, and it means not rewarding the failure of a future Congress with automatic access to more taxpayer dollars. Above all, it means serious reforms. We need to summon the courage to make some tough decisions right now. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Order, the leadership time is reserved.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Thank you. Briefly, Madam President, first a comment on immigration reform. We spent a great deal of time on the Senate floor, the last two Congresses, dealing with immigration reform. We've worked hard coming up with a solution, and we had this solution. We were working with President Bush toward coming up with a solution to immigration reform. The problem was even President Bush could not get his Republican colleagues to join with us in doing something about immigration reform. Our immigration system is broken and needs to be fixed. But it is so important that the President in El Paso today talks about the need for immigration reform, because he knows, we all know, as even President Bush knew, immigration reform was necessary. The problem is we can't get Republicans here in the Senate to help us. It's quite simple. We know that we have to do something about border security, and we've done a lot in that regard. Have we done enough? No. There's more that can be done, but we've done a lot in that direction, and rightfully so. We've just within the past year or so, we provided $650 billion for more border security. That was on a bipartisan basis. We passed that. That was important. We also have to do something about our guest worker program. We have, at any one given time, thousands and thousands of guest workers here. Why? Because it's necessary and has been for a long time. Out here in the Chesapeake Bay, we've learned that we have people who come in, to seasonal workers, who can do the work on the clams, the stuff of the Great Chesapeake Bay. We have about 1.5 million agricultural workers in our country, and we have a system that doesn't work even for them. We've got to do this. Our agriculture industry depends on this. We also have in our country today 11 million people who are undocumented. Madam President, there isn't anybody with an ounce of common sense that thinks we can deport 11 million people. We can't do it fiscally, and we can't do it physically. Therefore, we should do something about the 11 million people who are here. How should we do that? Put them on a pathway to legalization. It doesn't mean amnesty. It means that they would pay penalties and fines, that they would go to the back of the line, not the front of the line. They would have to learn English. They would have to stay out of trouble, pay taxes. There are certain things they would be required to do. And finally, Madam President, we have to do something about the unworkable employer sanction provision that was put in the 1986 law. It hasn't worked. Prior to that time, the burden was on the government to make sure that people who came to work throughout America were legal. We shifted that responsibility to employers. They can't do that. It's a catch-22 now. It's simply the way the law is set up now. It doesn't work. We now have, since '86, computerization that's taken over much of the world, and through that we can work toward having an employer sanction program in our country that will work. So my point is, President Obama should be commended for talking about immigration reform. It's necessary. My friend, the Republican leader, should also understand that we have tried, and for my Republican people to talk about immigration reform and not vote accordingly is something that people of America have witnessed now for many years. Madam President, saving money requires a lot of very, very difficult choices. Which programs do we cut in these tough times? Which priorities are more important than others? After we've seen in the Senate across the country over the last few months, a lot of people have a lot of different answers to these questions. Democrats believe that we have to get our spending under control, and we have to look at what needs to be cut. We need to have a fair program, one that looks at what we're going to do long-term with the equities of our spending programs. We have to look at what we do with revenues to make sure that they're fair and balanced. So there are a lot of choices. My friend, the Speaker of the House, gave a speech last night in New York. He talked about raising the debt limit and some of the things that he thinks would be necessary in order to get that done. But I would direct my friend, the Speaker's attention to one way to go very quickly to solving some of these problems. We know that there's waste in the federal budget and the tax code. But what I want to direct my friend, the Speaker's attention to, is these 5 big oil companies. We as taxpayers are giving billions and billions of dollars every year to these companies. Billions every year. Every cent of it is taxpayer money. Oil companies already are more than successful. These oil companies made $36 billion in profits during the first quarter of this year. I repeat that, $36 billion in profits during the first quarter of this year. Exxon Oil alone made 70% more this year than they did last year. Now, Exxon holds the record for making more than any corporation in the history of our country in years past. These oil companies, I repeat, made $36 billion in the first quarter. The industry's $36 billion in quarterly profits means they're making about $12 billion a month or $4 billion a week. And yet, the U.S. government is giving these companies billions of dollars in corporate welfare every year. That's unnecessary. Why are taxpayers on the hook for oil companies that are doing just fine on their own? If we're serious about reducing the deficit, what an easy place to start, I say to my friend, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. It's really a no-brainer. Let's use these savings from the taxpayer giveaways to drive down the deficit, not drive up oil companies' profits. We need to make one thing very, very clear, Madam President. Wasteful subsidies have nothing to do with gas prices. These oil handouts have existed for decades. Prices have continued to rise. Oil executive paychecks have also continued to rise. In the state of Alaska, they're paying $8 or $9 a gallon for gasoline. In the state of California, there's places where you pay as much as $5 a gallon for gasoline. Here at a Exxon station along the waterfront, I looked out the other day, and the gas prices there were within a few cents of paying $5 a gallon. That's here in our nation's capital. So that money that Americans are paying at the pump are not related to those subsidies that I've talked about, but those profits are proof enough that they don't need them. The companies don't need those subsidies. Even big oil CEOs, like the head of Shell, and Republicans in Congress, even my friend the Speaker has said on occasions that these subsidies aren't necessary. Some of our conservative colleagues have a hard time stomaching giving a hand to those who need it the most. But, Madam President, we should all agree, in the interest of fairness, common sense, and saving taxpayer money, that we cannot continue with this corporate welfare to those big oil companies who need it the least. That's a good place to start.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for debate only until 5 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the first hour equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the next 30 minutes.
Madam President.
The senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I'd like to rise in support of the comments made by the Majority Leader. I was in Chicago over the weekend and downstate as well in Illinois and saw these gasoline prices and understand the hardship they cause. At a BP filling station in Chicago near Lawrence and Lakeshore Drive, I ran into a man who was a plumber who had a van and went from job to job. And he said it's not unusual for him to spend now over $100 a week on gasoline. And, of course, that's taking away money that he could have brought home for his family. It's a real hardship on him. He kind of smiled and chuckled and said, but they do it to us every year, don't they? And that's true, Madam Speaker, whether you're talking about the situation in New Hampshire or in Illinois. We can predict the rites of spring in America, the opening of the baseball season, Easter egg hunts, Seder dinners for Passover, and skyrocketing gasoline prices. And then there's excuses. There's always an excuse. Oh, we had to switch from winter to summer. We didn't see that coming. Oh, there's a problem in the Middle East. Whatever it is, any excuse will do, and the gasoline prices go up. We can do something about it, and we should. The Majority Leader is right. We accept the challenge of Speaker John Boehner, who said in New York, let's make a serious effort to deal with this deficit. Well, we've got a great down payment, $21 billion that we can take off the deficit, and we can take it away from a group that doesn't need it. We're talking about the oil companies that are registering record profits, $36 billion. And if we decide to take away the subsidies, that are now being given to these extremely profitable companies, it'll save taxpayers $21 billion over 10 years. Let's get started there. That ought to be the easy part, because right now we know what's going on. We're paying for these high gasoline prices 3 times. First, when you fill up your tank. Oh, they hit you hard there, $60, $80, $100 just to fill up your tank. Second, because we're giving $4 billion a year in subsidy to the oil companies, taxpayers are being hit again. It isn't just what you pay at the gas pump, it's what you pay on April 15th. Part of that is going to the oil companies. But there's a third hit. Do you know where we get the money to pay the oil company subsidy? We borrow it from China, the largest creditor of the United States. We are borrowing 40 cents for every dollar we spend. So out of the $4 billion that we're talking about that's going annually to these oil companies, 40% of it, about $1.6 billion, being borrowed every single year from countries like China. So the third way we pay is ultimately on the debt to China and the interest on that debt. Can we afford that? At a time when Americans are sacrificing, can't we ask the oil companies with record profits to sacrifice their federal subsidies? That's all we're trying to do. I know that Senator Schumer from New York is going to take the floor momentarily and talk about this. We'll have a bill on the floor. And for those members on both sides of the aisle who've given impassioned speeches about reducing the deficit, here's your chance. It's a put up or shut up moment. If you really believe in reducing the deficit, here's $21 billion of low-hanging fruit. Let's pick it. Let's pick it for the taxpayers. Let's take this savings and put it right on deficit reduction. I hope that's something both sides of the aisle can agree on. Let me say a word very quickly here about the President's speech today in El Paso. Madam President, I've said on the floor many times because it's a source of pride to me, I'm a first-generation American. 100 years ago, my mother was brought to this country as an infant. 2 years of age, my grandmother brought her over from Lithuania, and they landed in Baltimore in 1911, 100 years ago. How they made it, 4 of them at that point, my aunt and uncle, grandmother, my mother, how they made it from Baltimore to East St. Louis, Illinois, I don't have a clue, because I'm sure they didn't speak but a handful of words in English. They made it like other immigrants made it, because they were determined to come to this country. They were prepared to leave everything behind in their lives, their home, their church, their relatives, their friend, their language, their culture, and come to this great nation and take the risk of opportunity. Think about that story and multiply it millions of times, and that's the story of America. The people who hate immigration are turning their back on the heart and essence of this great nation. We are an immigrant nation of people of extraordinary courage who picked up and moved and said, we're going to try our best in a new place with a new language. And when most of them arrived, and I'm sure it was a case with many who were on the boat with my mom, there were folks standing on the shoreline saying, no, not more of those people. Don't we have enough of them? They don't speak our language. They don't look like us. They don't dress like us. They eat funny food. They hang out with one another. You know, we don't need more of those people. For as long as immigrants have been coming to these shores, there have been people standing on the shore saying, please, pull up the ladder. We don't need any more of those folks. But we do. We need them not only because they work hard, we need them because they have a spirit and a determination which makes us a different nation. The DNA which each of us shares from those immigrant parents and grandparents gives us a drive and a determination to make this a better nation. And when we close the doors to immigration, orderly, legal immigration, we are closing the doors of opportunity in this country. The President will speak to immigration today. He has been a loyal friend of mine for a long time. He was a co-sponsor of the DREAM Act, which I introduced 10 years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if he brought it up today in El Paso. He did last week in the White House. I know that he's committed as I am to make sure that children who were brought to the United States as infants and youngsters who had no voice in the decision to come here, who have lived a good life here, worked hard, gone to school, said the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in the classroom, know no other flag but the U.S. flag, children who want to become tomorrow's adults and tomorrow's leaders deserve a chance. And the DREAM Act will give them that chance. They can choose to enlist in our military and become citizens of the United States, Or they can choose to complete college, at least 2 years of it, and find a path to citizenship. That is reasonable, it is compassionate, and it's fair. And I hope that as part of immigration reform we include it. I would plead with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, don't turn your back on America's heritage. Don't turn your back on fairness and compassion. Join us in real immigration reform. Join us in passing the DREAM Act. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from New York.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I want to commend my colleague and friend from Illinois for his outstanding remarks on both subjects, the deficit and on immigration. I'm here to talk about the deficit, but I will just touch on immigration. People are saying, well, why is the President going to El Paso when we haven't made enough progress on immigration? They bring up a point. Well, the President's point is the right one. He is bringing the message to the country on why we need real immigration reform. I think there's one thing 100 members of this chamber would agree on. Our present immigration system is broken, badly broken. We turn away lots of people who should be here. We also don't have a rational system for who should come here. And America's the lesser for it. As the Senator from Illinois pointed out, immigration is part of our proud, proud heritage. And immigrants help America. One of the reasons we are doing a lot better than Europe is we've welcomed new people into this country, and we integrate them and say, quick as you can, become Americans, because we all came from somewhere else originally. Now, I am still very hopeful that as the President sets the table and lets America know how important this is, that we can get bipartisan immigration reform done in this chamber and on the floor of the Senate and even over to the House. It's hard, no question. But I believe that first, to get comprehensive reform, we need bipartisan support. That's obvious. But second, that there's enough need, people see enough need to do it, that we can actually get it done, particularly if the President goes around the country, as he's beginning to do today in El Paso and as he's done in the past, and talks about the need for immigration reform, setting the table so that we can actually get something real done. Now, let me speak to the issue I came here to speak about, which is the deficit. Speaker Boehner was in my hometown of New York City last night, and he talked about how important it is to get a handle on this deficit. And on that issue, my colleagues on this side of the aisle and I certainly have no problem. Neither does President Obama. The President has proposed $4 trillion in cuts, a huge amount of cutting, $4 trillion to close the deficit, both on the spending side and the tax side. So anyone who thinks that, you know, one side wants to cut the deficit and the other doesn't just hasn't looked at the facts. But obviously we have to come together. If each side sticks to its own position, nothing will happen. And there should be one obvious place where Speaker Boehner and his colleagues can show some goodwill, and that is on these subsidies to big oil. No one can defend them. No one. Oil companies are making record profits. Gas prices are at an all-time or close to an all-time high. And we, the taxpayers, are continuing to subsidize the 5 big oil companies. You couldn't write a more ridiculous scenario. And Senator Menendez, along with Senator Brown, Senator McCaskill, later today will introduce legislation that our side agrees with, which will say, take all that money and put it to deficit reduction. There are some who would have preferred to put the money into encouraging independence from particularly foreign oil. But because the deficit is such a huge problem, because we might have a dispute with our friends on the other side of the aisle as to where the money ought to go, everyone can agree it would be worthwhile to take a little bit of the burden off the taxpayers, have the oil companies pay their fair share, and stop these ridiculous tax breaks and subsidies to big oil, to the 5 big oil companies. And so I would ask Speaker Boehner to show some good faith Some on his side of the aisle have already said that these subsidies don't belong. They were created at a time when oil was $17 a barrel, when we worried about production here. Oil is now hovering. It just went over $100 a barrel again yesterday. The oil company, you don't have to worry about their desire to explore. They're looking for every place they can. They don't need a tax subsidy to do it. And some might argue, well, what about the small and middle-sized companies? Well, many of us believe that they too shouldn't get the tax breaks, but this bill that Senator Menendez will be introducing shortly doesn't even touch them. Just the 5 big oil companies, just the tax breaks that they now get. Why not? A perfect way to start off this debate and show some goodwill. Democrats have agreed to cuts, lots of cuts. People on the other side of the aisle can show some agreement on revenues. This area of revenues, which almost nobody can dispute, shouldn't be there. And so the time to repeal these giveaways is now. We would most prefer to do it in a bipartisan way. Speaker Boehner, those on his side of the aisle can show some good faith that they're not just dug in and saying, only my way, because only my way will lead to the kind of scenario that many tremble at, which is the debt ceiling not being approved. We on this side of the aisle don't believe that should happen. Many on the other side of the aisle have said they don't. The first good step that can be taken to show a little give on the other side is eliminate the big tax subsidies to big oil. I urge colleagues to support it. I urge Speaker Boehner to pivot on his speech from yesterday and support this proposal, and it would create a great deal of goodwill and put us in a direction of reducing the deficit that we all so much want to reduce. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Senators offering general speeches for most of the day today after gaveling in this morning at 10 Eastern. Work continues behind the scenes on a debt reduction agreement that would be inserted into a Senate budget plan. This afternoon, Vice President Biden will host another meeting on the budget today. It's a follow-up meeting to one that happened last week with lawmakers and administration officials. It happened at Blair House, which is across the street from the White House. That meeting is set to start this afternoon at 3:15 Eastern. You also heard Majority Leader Harry Reid offering remarks on immigration reform. This morning, President Obama is heading to El Paso, Texas, to speak about the administration's immigration plan. That happens at about 3:30 this afternoon. We are planning live coverage on C-SPAN 3 this afternoon, along with your phone calls. The President will also appear at 2 Democratic fundraisers this afternoon.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, I ask the unanimous consent that the quorum call in progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
And, Madam President, it's been called to my attention that there are some people that are trying to respond to the fact that we have such high prices of gasoline at the pumps in a totally unrealistic way, in a way that is class warfare, in a way that doesn't make any sense to anyone when we have a solution to this problem that we've been talking about for a long period of time. There are some who are trying to say that we're going to have to do something about the subsidies that are given to oil companies, about all of the amount of what they've been doing over the years, and that all of a sudden they're the ones who are responsible for the high price of gas at the pumps. A CRS report was requested by my colleague, Lisa Murkowski. It grew out of frustration with the Democrats' refrain that America has only 3% of the global oil reserves, and therefore, under this view, more drilling and production at home is futile. I think as President Obama has said many times, he says with 3% of the world's oil reserves, the U.S. cannot drill its way to energy security. Well, it can, but it's not 3%. You know, a CRS report came out later and showed, and this is something that people don't want to believe, but it's out there, and it is a fact, that United States of America has the largest recoverable reserves of oil, gas, and coal of any country in the world, more than China, more than Saudi Arabia, more than anyone else. Our problem is that we have a political problem. That is this administration, and it goes really right down Democrat-Republican lines. The Democrats put 83% of America's federal lands off limits to drilling. Of course, that's just fine for the administration because they have made some statements I'm going to read in a minute to demonstrate very clearly that they want to increase the price of gas at the pumps. But the idea that you can do this through regulation, trying to further tax the oil industry, CRS stated tax changes outlined in the President's budget proposal, and I'm quoting now from the CRS, Congressional Review, everyone knows that's completely nonpartisan. They say, quote, would make oil and natural gas more expensive for the U.S. consumers and likely increase foreign dependence. And I was very proud of a couple of the Democrats over there, the only two who came out and were outspoken. Senator Landrieu from Louisiana said, quote, the administration has put forward draconian taxes on the oil and gas industry. It seems very contrary to our stated goal of being more energy sufficient. In the United States, taxing this domestic industry will instead cut jobs and increase our dependence on foreign oil. So I want you to deliver that message again to the administration. We have bipartisan opposition to the increasing taxes on this industry. Mark Begich, Senator Begich from Alaska, said, quote, the President's proposal would cost thousands of jobs in Alaska and across the country. Energy companies are among the businesses investing and creating jobs at a time when our country needs them both, and I will fight any measure that ends these incentives. Well, I think it should be pretty obvious without even a few of the Democrats coming in, these two, and I appreciate the fact that they did, that you're not going to be able to reduce the price of oil at the pumps by further taxing the oil and gas industry. I mean, it's ludicrous to even think that anyone would suggest that you can increase taxes on the oil industry and the gas industry, and somehow you're going to have energy more available, and you're going to reduce the cost of gas at the pumps. You know, there is a way of doing this that I think is so simple. There's not a person in this country, certainly no one who serves in this body, who back during his or her elementary education didn't learn about supply and demand. Here we are in the United States of America, sitting on more gas and oil than any other country in the world, and we are the only country that doesn't exploit its own natural resources. We're the only country. And if we did, we would be completely independent from the Middle East. We wouldn't have to go outside of this continent in order to supply our needs. And people say, well, you know, if you do that and you start developing, then it's going to take a long time to do. It's going to maybe be 8 or 10 years. Well, that would be fine if because they were saying that 8 or 10 years ago, we could have done it then. But that's not quite true, because the economists have said that if we announce that we're going to go to these areas where we're not exploiting our own resources, I'm talking about the Gulf, I'm talking about the East Coast, the West Coast, I'm talking about the North Slope, ANWR in Alaska, I'm talking about the public lands where 83% of our public lands are off limits for drilling. If we are to announce today that we were going to open up drilling and exploration and production in the United States of America, that price would drop tomorrow. It dropped immediately, because people would know that we are going to be able to use our own resources. And, you know, I hate to say this, but somebody's got to say it. We have an administration that is so wrapped up in saying that one of these days we're going to have all this green energy and all that, that they themselves are on record saying that they don't want, that they want to increase the price of oil and gas. Let's look what happened. The administration, this is Alan Kruger, the Department of Treasury. He said the administration believes that it is no longer sufficient to address our nation's energy needs by finding more fossil fuels. The Obama Treasury Department said, to the extent the lower tax rate encourages overproduction of oil and gas, it is detrimental to long-term energy security. Therefore, you know, we just want to do away with oil and gas. And then here's the best one here. That's the Energy Secretary of President Obama, Stephen Chu, says, quote, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. We have an administration who wants to increase the price of oil and gas, the price of gasoline at the pumps, to be comparable to Europe, which is between $7.5 and $8 a gallon. And I think that obviously that people would know that this is true. It wasn't long ago that President Obama gave his energy speech. In his energy speech, he said, well, there is all this abundance of clean gas that we can use. And then at the end of the speech, he said, but we have some problems in getting the gas out of the ground. He's talking about natural gas in this case, not about oil. And he says, and so I happened to give the response in one of the TV stations, and I said, you know, he says he wants natural gas, and at the same time, he says he wants to end hydraulic fracturing. Let me tell you about hydraulic fracturing, Madam Chairman, Madam President. The hydraulic fracturing started in the state of Oklahoma, my state, in 1948. It's a way of pumping water fluids, and water primarily, into these tight formations. These tight formations mostly are down about a mile to 2 to 3 miles under the surface, and that will allow them to go in and get the gasoline. We have enough gasoline, enough natural gas to take care of our needs for the next 100 years. We just need to use these systems that we have. Now, if you do away with hydraulic fracturing, then that means you're not going to be able to get any of the natural gas out of the system. You can't produce 1 cubic foot of natural gas without using hydraulic fracturing. Now, what did we find out last week? Stephen Chu, Secretary Chu, is going to be in charge of a study to see how dangerous hydraulic fracturing is. Now, wait a minute. This is the same guy that said somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels of Europe. So I would only say this. We actually have 3 problems. We have the problem that we have all of this abundance that we're not going after, and then hydraulic fracturing. And then you've got to keep in mind, once you get it, we have to refine it. And that's where the EPA is coming in. I stood here at this podium for 9 years talking about the problems that we have with cap-and-trade. The fact that we can't have a cap-and-trade system that is going to have the effect of costing the American people the estimates of between $300 and $400 billion a year, and that's supposedly for greenhouse gases. Now, they tried to the Kyoto Treaty way back in the 90s, then they tried 7 different times in the Senate floor to pass legislation that would have the same type of cap-and-trade as we would have if we had become a party to and ratified the Kyoto Treaty. Now, the problem with that is, even if there are people out there, and there are a lot of people, right, a very large percentage of people in America, some 40%, believe that somehow the greenhouse gases are causing catastrophic global warming, and even if that were true, which it is not, but if it were true, that it doesn't make any difference what we do here in the United States of America. I admire the director, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Lisa Jackson, who was appointed by our President Obama, because even though, yes, she's way off in the left wing, she's liberal and all of that, but when you ask her a direct question, she gives an honest answer. And she gave honest answers. One of them was, I asked her the question, I said, I think it was, at that time, was the Markey bill. It was one of the cap-and-trade bills. And I said, in the event that we were to pass a cap-and-trade bill here in the United States, would that reduce emissions? And her response was, no, it wouldn't, because that would only affect the United States of America. That's not where the problem is. The problem is in India, in Mexico, China. China, right now, they are cranking out 2 coal-fired plants, generating plants, every week in China. So it's going to continue there. In fact, you could argue that it would even be more expensive. It would even be more expensive because or more polluting, if you call CO2 a pollution, because it would go. Our jobs would go to places like China, where they do have this problem. They don't have any emission control. So you have the problem of refining it once you get it. And I see my good friend from is on the floor. He's going to be speaking, I'm sure, to perhaps the same thing. But I only want to mention one thing, that the cap-and-trade agenda, since they were not able to get it passed, they are trying to do it through the Environmental Protection Agency, through regulations. Lion Oil, based in El Dorado, Arkansas, recently testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee that it commenced a $2 million expansion of its El Dorado refinery in 2007 with 2,000 construction jobs, but its completion has since been stalled. As Lion Oil Vice President Steve Cousins explained, and I'm quoting now, the uncertainty and the potentiality of prohibitive costs associated with possible cap-and-trade legislation and EPA's greenhouse gas regulations were the critical factor leading us to delay the completion and expansion. What I'm saying is, even if we are, and I believe we are going to be able to break down this barrier and overcome this mentality that we should not be developing our own resources, but then we also have to have a way of refining that. We can do it. It's within our reach, and we can bring down the price of oil and gas and certainly gasoline at the pump by tomorrow. If we were to announce that we're going to stop being the only country in the world that doesn't exploit its own resources. If we go after the oil and gas that is available in the Gulf and the East Coast and the West Coast, our public lands, as well as the North Slope of Alaska, we could be independent from any dependency on the Middle East. And with that, I believe the American people understand that. It goes right back to our elementary school education. It's supply and demand. We have the supply in the United States of America. We've got to open up that supply so that we can use it, and obviously that would lower the price of gas at the pumps. And with that, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Alabama.
I thank my colleague from Oklahoma for his leadership on Environment and Public Works Committee, and I'm pleased to be back on that committee with him and share very much the substance of his views about the need to produce more American oil and gas, and it keeps money in the United States, creates jobs in the United States, creates tax revenue for the United States. Offshore oil and gas in our Gulf produces billions of dollars for our states and the federal government. And why we'd want to produce oil and gas off Brazil and not produce it off our shore, I don't know. But I thank my colleague for that. Madam President, I just want to make a few remarks about the budget circumstances in which we find ourselves. Yesterday, we learned that the White House, the President, scheduled 2 summit meetings on the budget this week. The President will meet with Senate Democrats on Wednesday and Republicans on Thursday. By calling this summit, it would seem that the President has effectively canceled this week's planned unveiling of a Democratic budget, Senate budget, in the Senate Budget Committee that was planned earlier, actually. First it was going to be Monday, then Tuesday, then Wednesday, and It looks like maybe it won't be held this week at all. It might be. Senator Conrad could do that somehow with this event occurring, but may not. Regardless of this new discussion period, it's my expectation and belief that the American people should be given a Senate budget plan so can be examined and we can know what's in it and see what it's about. The American public deserves to know where our elected leaders stand. I hate to say we've gone 700+ days, maybe 740 now, without a budget for the United States of America during a time of the greatest systemic debt situation we've ever faced. We'll have double the debt of the United States, I believe, by next year in 4 years. We'll add $13 trillion to the debt over the 10 years presented by the President Obama's budget that he sent to us some time ago. And there have been all kinds of discussions and talks and a lot of speeches. The President created a fiscal commission, and they came forward with a serious proposal that was worthy of real insight and study. They spent a lot of time on it. Did not go far enough, in my opinion, to reduce our surging growth and spending, but it was intellectually honest, and it offered us some very real suggestions about how we could do better. Then we started hearing that after the President's budget was submitted, and it was received very badly. In fact, it was not helpful at all, but actually made the debt trajectory that we're on worse. We had a gang of 6 senators who tried to work together to establish a budget plan that might work for us. They met in secret and had these ideas, and I was interested in what they had to say, but somehow that seems to have gone on the back burner. Then we had Vice President Biden. He's going to lead a discussion with House and Senate Republicans and Democrats, and he's going to work out something. And now just yesterday we have the President's going to have another meeting at the White House and talk to us. I hope it's not like the one in which he invited the House Budget Chairman, Paul Ryan, and criticized him sitting right there in front of him for producing what I think is a historic budget that would put us on a sound path if followed. Here we are. We've not gotten a plan or a commitment as to what this administration intends to advocate for. They submitted their budget. It was alleged to have reduced the deficit by $2 trillion, but when the Congressional Budget Office, our objective analyst, took the document that they submitted and studied it in detail, they concluded it would add $2 trillion. In other words, it would create more debt over the next 10 years by $2 trillion than was projected to accrue without the budget. That's not what financial experts are telling us. That's not what economists and professors are telling us we need to do. It's unacceptable. That budget was criticized, and we hadn't heard much about it. Well, the President, for a week or so, tried to propose that it would have us live within our means and help pay down the debt. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, the lowest deficit in 10 years would be over $700 billion. And the President said this was going to have us living within our means. So apparently, desiring to back off that, the President made a speech. And he said he's now going to save $4 trillion. And the budget staff, I'm ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, we looked at the speech and took what he said, and we noticed a couple of things. We noticed that he had moved the period from 10 years to 12 years, and that would that made the numbers look a lot better compared to a 10-year savings plan. You save a little bit each year, and you go 12 years, it looks better than 10, and everybody was talking about 10. It's kind of a little gimmick, you see, to make your numbers look better. And then they gave, incorrectly, they took credit for every dollar that was saved when the Republican House negotiated with the Senate, and with the CR reduced spending about $29 billion a year. They took credit for that, and that was about $2.9 trillion of the savings. The net result is that it was not any different, really, than the budget plan he had proposed, except it took credit for the House reduction in spending, which should not be done since the budget is for the future and the House savings take place this year. And secondly, it was 12 years. So I have to say the House Republicans, Paul Ryan, stood up, and they faced the American people, and they revealed in advance the core of their plan. I attended one press conference in which Paul Ryan announced the budget that he was moving forward with. He had a series of press briefings. He basically said, this is my plan, and I'm ready to hear any exceptions you have to it, and I'm prepared to answer your questions, and I'm prepared to defend what it is that we've done. Honest, direct, responsible approach. And he dealt with the long-term financial threats to America as well as the immediate, and the numbers that he proposed get us to a point where we can perhaps, so we can certainly say we're not on the same debt trajectory that put us in such great risk. I believe it's probably the most serious effort that I've seen in the 14 years I've been in the Senate to address the significant fiscal challenges that we face. See, we face not only a short-term problem, but we face a long-term systemic problem. We've got an aging population, people drawing more Social Security for longer periods and Medicare for longer periods. We've got other entitlement programs, and we've been spending extraordinarily. And so all of that has got to be a part of our discussion about how to put this country on a sound path. And every expert that we've had, Republicans and Democrats, have testified before the Budget Committee, and Senator Conrad, our Democratic chairman, has done a good job in calling good witnesses who've told us the truth about the grim circumstances under which we find ourselves. And they've told us if you don't act, we could have a debt crisis. They've told us that the debt we've already accrued and continues to increase, that debt is right now pulling down our economy. Our growth is not what it would be had we not incurred this much debt. This is pretty uncontradicted. When I asked Secretary of Treasury Geithner about that, he agreed with a Rogoff-Reinhardt study that says when your debt reaches 90% of your GDP, it pulls down economic growth 1%. Secretary Geithner said, yes, that's an excellent study, and I would add one more thing, he said. When you get that much debt, you run the risk of having a debt crisis that could throw us back into some sort of recession or financial problem that we've had. That's President Obama's Secretary of Treasury. So we know we've got a serious problem, and we need to do something about it. So the President submitted a budget. It's basically been rejected. I can't imagine that the Senate would bring it forward. as the Senate Democratic budget. The House of Representatives, in accordance with the law and the time frames of the Budget Act, have produced a budget, publicly stated it before they voted on it, and have defended it since. And now we haven't had one in the Senate. The Senate, by law, should have produced its budget and started its markup 6 weeks ago. The law says we're supposed to have passed a budget by April 15th, tax day. We haven't even begun to mark it up. It was supposed to have begun this week on Monday, and we've not started. And people are politically attempting to explain, Democratic spin masters are attempting to explain what it's all about. Why are we doing these things? Why hasn't a real budget been produced? They say Republicans are divided. Oh, you've got Tea Party people and Republicans are all divided. Republicans have passed a budget in the Republican House. Where is the Democratic Senate? Who's divided? Why can't they produce a document? Why do we have to have the Vice President here and the President having meetings here and the President giving speeches here? Why don't we see a real budget that the American people can see in advance and be able to evaluate, and senators have to stand up, as we're paid to do, and cast votes for or against it? I really think that's what we need to be doing here. I don't agree with the fact that the President is leading. I wish I could say that. Maybe he'll surprise us Thursday, I hope so, with something. But I don't sense any leadership at all, because the budget he produced will not do the job. And that's the only one that we have in the Senate, I guess, at this point. Indeed, Mr. Erskine Bowles, the man he chose to head his debt commission, said that the President's budget came nowhere close, nowhere near doing what's necessary. Actually, what he said was that the President's budget comes nowhere near doing what's necessary to avoid our fiscal nightmare. Nowhere near doing that. So I'm wondering what's happening here. The American people get it. They sent a message in the election in November, sent 64 new members to the House of Representatives. Almost every single one of them promised to do something about reckless spending in Washington. And what about this budget that the President has submitted to us? It's the only one, I guess, we have in the Senate. The Senate Democratic leadership hasn't presented one. It called for a 10.5% increase in education, 9.5% increase in energy, 10.5% increase in the State Department budget, 62% increase in the transportation budget. Well, we don't have the money. 40 cents of every dollar we spend today is borrowed. It cannot be continued. We are on an unsustainable path. The American people know it. Every expert has told us. We know it. Where are our leaders in the Senate? Senator Conrad apparently made a presentation of his budget. The Republicans have asked Senator Conrad to present it to us 72 hours before the committee meets. He said he's not going to do that. He made a presentation to the Democratic conference, and apparently it didn't go well. Senator Conrad must have proposed, apparently did propose, reducing spending more than they like to hear. The Democratic leader, Mr. Reid, Senator Reid, was sort of critical, actually. He said, well, it's a nice bunch of charts. Obviously, he wasn't happy. So what are we going to have? When are we going to see something? We're going to go another 800 days. We're not going to have a budget this year. The way things should work is this. The Senate should come forward. The Democratic Senate, they have the majority. You pass a budget with a simple majority. Let's propose a budget that hopefully would get bipartisan support. If not, you stand up and say what you believe in and how this budget reflects your vision for America. The House has done that. Then you go to conference committee after it comes to the floor and is voted on, goes to the conference committee, and differences are worked out. It comes back, and you have to vote on the final passage on an agreed-upon budget. We have to have a budget. It's time for this country to begin to reverse the reckless trend we are on, because we're placing our nation at risk. Mr. Bowles and Senator Alan Simpson, when they testified before the Budget Committee, warned us that we have to do something significant. In their written statement that they both signed, they said, we are facing the most predictable economic crisis in our history. When asked when that could occur, Mr. Bowles said 2 years maybe. Alan Simpson said, I think maybe 1. Not when our grandchildren, I'm talking about now. So I guess what I would just say, Madam President, I think it's time for us to go back to regular order. We're trying a lot of different things to confront this crisis we face. It seems to me that our leadership in the Senate is desperately seeking to avoid having to do the responsible thing, and that's to stand up and produce a budget. If you aren't prepared to stand before the American people and tell how you think the country ought to be run and where the money ought to be spent and how much ought to be collected, then you're not leading, it seems to me. And I'm very disappointed in the President's leadership. He's been roundly criticized because the only proposal he has sent to us is irresponsible. It in no way comes close, as Mr. Bowles said, to doing what's necessary to avoid our fiscal nightmare. And that's the path we are headed to. It is not a matter of dispute. We will not reach 10, 15 years down the road spending like we are, because we'll have a catastrophe before then. Alan Greenspan, the former head of the Federal Reserve, said that he thought that maybe some sort of compromise would be reached that would be good for the country. Only question, he said, was whether it would be before or after a debt crisis occurs. This was a few weeks ago. Alan Greenspan saying this. It's a challenge to us, and it's a challenge to the leadership in this Senate to come before the American people and produce their plan and seek support here on the floor of the Senate. And let's debate it. Let's have amendments offered. Let's go to conference and somehow, some way, hammer out a budget that will put this country on a better path. We have no other choice. It's our defining moment for this Congress. We have no other higher duty than to confront the dangerous fiscal path we're on. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor.
Madam Chairman.
The Senator from